Welcome back to another episode of the Boxseat Babes podcast. Today we are discussing the latest show to arrive on Broadway in Detroit, Kimberly Akimbo. But before we discuss what you can expect from this musical, like, follow, and subscribe to Boxseat Babes on all social media platforms at Boxseat Babes. Spoiler warning, we are going to be talking about the Tony Award winning musical Kimberly Akimbo, so if you've not seen it yet while it's on its tour, if you want to go into it blind, please scroll on and come back to it, and we'd love to continue this conversation later. Joining me today is somebody who is not RJ. We have our other box seat babe here, the official Ryann Ferguson. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just want to say thank you for going to see Kimberly Akimbo at the Fisher Theater last week.
Of course. I was happy to do it.
So right off the bat, what did you know about Kimberly Akimbo before we went and saw it at the Fisher?
Absolutely nothing. I had not listened to the music. I had not read the synopsis. I went in 100% blind. And I thought it was great. Like
Okay.
I think I almost enjoy, there's the difference between going into a show and knowing everything about it and comparing, and then there's seeing something fresh for the first time.
What's interesting about this show is that I've had a lot of people who I know who've seen it in New York. Obviously, this won the Tony Award for Best Musical, and they all hated it. And so I've had this preconceived notion in my head that this show was going to be bad.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason. It was just there was no way that this was going to be good. Everybody's talking about how bad it is. It's one of those shows that you have to really like the niche that it comes from.
Yes.
And so I had this preconceived notion about going into it, and I tried to have an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also really didn't know much about it either. And so it's an interesting story in the fact that it feels like it's something that I grew up watching because it reminded me so much of the film Jack. Have you seen Jack?
I haven't.
Well, Robin Williams, and he plays somebody who's aging rapidly and trapped in a body, which is kind of what Kimberly's dealing with in Kimberly Akimbo.
Yeah.
So let's start off with we're going to jump into the story of this. We are in the 90s,
Yes.
which is really important to the storyline. Which we were just wee little babies in the 90s. Did it have a nostalgia factor for you, kind of seeing some of these things, especially they're kind of teenagers, so we were younger, we were more like that kid age.
Mm-hmm.
But did you have any nostalgic factors from seeing the show?
So at the very beginning, when they're at the ice skating rink,
Mm-hmm.
that reminded me so much of we didn't go to the ice skating rink, but we went to the roller rink a lot.
Yes,
And
great
it reminded me so heavily of that. It was actually there were a couple of moments where I was like, man, I need to go to the roller rink.
Do they even have roller rinks anymore?
There's one by me, yeah.
That is such a that was such a passing a passage of childhood of going to the roller rink and rollerblading.
My friends would have all their birthday parties there. We'd go rollerblading, and then they'd do the pizza, and yeah,
It was the whole thing.
Yeah, it was.
And something about the opening scene that I think is really interesting is that you're introduced to a slew of characters and a slew of concepts in such a short amount of time. So there's these group of kids that are at the roller rink. Do they have names? No. We have Seth, who works there, and he's kind of the one that serves as a love interest throughout the story. And you have, Delia, and you have Martin and Teresa and Aaron, and they kind of all have their own little stories throughout the show. But they're introduced in this opening scene as being this friend group, which we'll talk a little bit about their storyline in a little bit. And then we have Kimberly, who's just off by herself.
Yeah.
And she's kind of an outsider. She's not with these other kids because she doesn't really, and it's because of her disease, which you kind of find out is that she feels like she's on the outside. But what did you think of the dynamics in that scene?
Well, I think it's also important to note that she's new to the area.
Yes.
Because her family had just moved there, I think within weeks or something, they say, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very quickly.
Yeah. And so not only is she coming in without knowing anybody, but then she's also coming into a new town, new school as a teenager with this disease that makes her look so different from everyone. And I think that's such a thing when you're that age of being like, oh, like when you know you have a difference and it's an outward thing, not an inward thing, it's so much more isolating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, being a teenager already is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it already sucks.
Yeah.
And then to be a new kid, which I have to say that I was really lucky because I was never a new kid. I grew up in the same school district and went from school to school to school. But that has to be a hard experience for somebody, on top of the fact that you look like you're 70 when you're only 16.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine all this kind of going through Kimberly's head as she's trying to be a kid in a city that doesn't know who she is and doesn't understand what's going on with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then her dad walks in. And boy, the dynamics of this family, I don't know about you, but they really irritated me because they were just like awful parents. Actually, I think there's no adult in the show that's really redeemable here.
100%. I have to say though, I did love the Aunt Debra. I did love Aunt Debra. But
we did love it, Aunt Debra.
No, I agree. I mean, both of her parents are narcissists in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, as a child growing up, you already have differences and both of your parents are narcissists. Like, you could tell she was being the parent to her dad more than her dad was being the parent to her. Like,
Absolutely.
I got you coffee so you can sober up. What lie are we going to tell mom tonight? Like,
I mean, he was the casebook, alcoholic. Like,
right.
Not dealing with his issues, stuck in a life that he didn't want, with a situation he didn't know how to handle. And I found it really hard to almost sympathize with him, as well as the mom who is clearly is sick. She's a hypochondriac almost, broken hands, she's pregnant. And again, Kimberly's the one taking care of them because they're almost two young parents that didn't know how to function. They're still teenagers themselves.
Yes.
And they are awful to her. Like, they are absolutely awful.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what I'd do in her shoes if I was Kimberly.
Right. No, I agree. I think, like, they do a really good job, I think, of showcasing, like, how isolated she is and feels. Like, and they do it, like, in the way, like, her room is off to the side and almost the only room that they show other than the living room when they're in the house. Like, when she goes over there, like, there is a wall, even though there's not an actual wall there. And she's just, like, listening to her parents talk about how, like, she isn't, and it feels very directed at her. Like, it's not even that they were teenage parents that, made a mistake and, they have a kid and now they're burning. It's because she's so different that's the cause of all of their problems.
Yeah, they blame her.
They blame her blatantly for it.
Yeah, like, there is a scene with I think it's the dad, and he basically says that, like, he didn't ask for a daughter like that.
But even the mom makes a comment too, where she's like, I hope that this one, like, referring to the baby she's pregnant with, like, is normal or something like that. Like,
yeah. Like, things that are clearly abusive.
And even at the end, when they're talking about, like, the baby, and it, like, the big twist and reveal of the fact that the dad isn't the dad to the new baby, like, her mom purposefully went out and found somebody else just so that this baby wouldn't have the same disease.
Yes. And that was the reason why they moved.
Right.
When earlier in the show, they made it sound like it was because of Aunt Debra. Like,
right.
Oh, Aunt Debra's a troublemaker. People know her. We have to leave. But it was truly that the mom didn't want a child who was, I think she used the word broken, and I could be wrong.
Like that. Yeah.
But, like, something that's clearly, like, makes Kimberly feel like she is not wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Because she isn't wanted.
Yeah.
And so that's really an interesting, like, that's kind of like the carrying dynamic through the show is the family and the family unit. Which is also kind of plays into the narrative because Aunt Debra does end up showing up. And like you said, Aunt Debra is kind of fun. She's the fun part of this show.
Yeah.
But she's also the troublemaker. She's also the one that's there to stir the shit up, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of kind of her story through this?
Aunt Debra's or?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting that, like, especially the way she's first introduced in the library, where you just right off the bat get the vibes that this woman is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's a crazy good time, but she's just straight up crazy. I really liked the, like, throughput line of her, like, being like, nothing has been handed to me. Nothing in my life has been easy. I have had to go out and take everything that I get. And she's kind of twisted it to be this thing of, like, this Robin Hood type thing almost.
Yes. Like, if you don't do it for yourself, nobody else is.
Mm-hmm. But I also kind of feel like she's the only one that really sees Kimberly. Like, past her, her physical type stuff.
In fact, I almost want to argue, and maybe there's some out there that would disagree, I think she's the only one that loves Kimberly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know there's some people who would say that her parents do love her. I struggle to see where.
Yeah.
But like her aunt, like truly was kind of the one just being like, Kimberly's amazing and she can do anything and she's sick. And like we're talking about the other baby, but we're not talking about the fact that Kimberly's afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did go ahead.
Oh no, but even like her birthday. Like,
yeah,
the part of the play when it's her birthday, and Aunt Debra's the one that's like, BT Dubs, it's Kimberly's birthday.
Yes. And I think it shows, too, just how much why her family hates her so much. Like, why, because Debra and Kimberly's mom are the ones that are related. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of hatred for Debra because I think she reflects their lack of sympathy and empathy and love for their own daughter, which should be almost inherent. You would think a lot of people would argue that it is inherent when you're a parent, that you love your daughter so much you would do anything for her. And Debra's the only one looking out for her.
Yeah.
But even she's not looking out for her fully.
Right. It's a very self-centered, like, I'm looking at me first, but then it could, what's benefiting me could benefit you.
Mm-hmm. So one of the main threads of this play, for those who haven't seen it and want to know, is the fact that Kimberly wants a family vacation, and Debra sees an opportunity to do some mail fraud, some check fraud, and bring in all these young kids from the high school who all have different reasons for needing money and using them to her advantage. And they all, like kids do, they all go along with it. Like they all are just very much like this sounds like a great idea. We get what we want and there's no repercussions. Mm-hmm. Because Debra definitely paints that in her entry song, like you said, the line is like, when life gives you lemons, throw them away and steal the apples because who the fuck wants lemons? Yeah. And like, so she's very much she's had a hard life and she's really fought really hard to have that life. Mm-hmm. And she's kind of teaching that to Kimberly. They're like, you can't just settle for whatever somebody else is going to give you. Mm-hmm. But it gets her into a lot of trouble in a way of that, like, we don't see the trouble, but like the trouble is assumed that something bad could possibly happen because they're committing fraud.
Right.
What did you think of that story kind of weaved in between the family drama and the friend drama and the boyfriend drama? Did you like that?
It came out of left field a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, like, I feel like as a musical, it's very like, things come out of left field, they come out of right field, and they somehow cohesively like come together.
Yeah, I did not know where they were going at first with this. And I was like, how are you connecting this storyline of when Debra pulls the mailbox through the living room to the basement? I was like, how is this going to connect? There's no way.
I really didn't. And even I was trying to think at the time, like, because she's bringing it in for some kind of a crime. I was like, what could she possibly be doing with that USPS mailbox?
Truly, like when she was saying about a mailbox, I was thinking like a personal mailbox, and then when she pulled that in there, I said, "Oh no, she's doing the big fraud." Like, which is just such a, like you said, it's such a out of left field thing, and you're like, how is this all going to connect?
Right.
And it connects through trauma, which really is kind of that cohesive piece that really takes Kimberly Akimbo from start to finish, is the trauma of like dealing with sickness, dealing with illness, kind of the theme of like life is too short.
Yeah.
And I think that Kimberly definitely feels that. And that's where the emotional aspect came for me for the show, is that the story is of Kimberly's facing her death. Like, her disease most people only live to be 16. And she's having her 16th birthday. And so like, what a way to kind of have more reality just kind of shoved in your face. What was your emotional connection to that?
I don't know that I specifically had one to like the mortality of it. But I think centered around it, like the way she's pushing so hard for like, if I'm going to die soon, what I want most in this world is for my family to like be who I want them to be. And like, there was a bit of the I think it's in the second act after her birthday, where like her dad stops drinking and her mom's like, I'm going to be a good mom. And she's getting everything she ever wanted. And I think that is so relatable to so many kids, of being like, I want, like, this is what I want for my family. This is who I want my family to be. And what can I, as the child, like, do to make my parents want to do this? For me, that was the emotional part of it, where I was just like, I'm watching her try to like fight for this thing, because she's just like, if I'm gonna die, like, just once, I want my family to put me first.
And like, there is a manipulativeness of that from her parents, because they use those as birthday presents of like, we're gonna go on a trip, we're gonna be happy, I'm gonna stop drinking. And as a psychologist, I see this all the time, where kids just, when their life isn't the ideal situation that they have painted in their head, they will do anything to achieve that. And any breadcrumb that a parent gives them is the biggest specialist breadcrumb they've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so then to watch her be disappointed once again, that hurts.
I teared up a little, I'm not gonna lie.
I don't blame you, because like, how could you not tear up when you see somebody's heartbreaking? Because at the end of the day, she's a teenager, and she's still a kid at that, you know, like, because people don't think about that. Like, regardless of how she looked, regardless of what you think a 16-year-old is, a 16-year-old is still a kid who just wants happiness, just wants to be happy. And to not see your parents give you that to you, again, goes back to just how kind of awful they were.
Yeah.
But tied through all of these things, we have the lesbian, straight, gay, straight, square, and then we also have Seth, who is also a school friend, but kind of the love interest. And this story, I have to be honest, this is the part of the show where I did struggle a little bit, because I didn't see how the friends added to the show.
Yes.
Like, what was their story? Like, do you see anything where Kimberly Akimbo benefited from having that love quadrilateral?
The laughs. Like, what I noticed was, like, the audience laughed, because you literally had all four of them were in love with a different person, and nobody was in love with each other, you know, type of thing. And those awkward moments were where the people were laughing.
Sure.
But as far as like the connectiveness to the story, no. Like, it's almost like a separate thing that's happening.
Yes.
They don't really tie in until the mail fraud.
And then they're out just as quickly as they're in.
Yes.
Like, I can only think of one or two scenes where they actually interact with Kimberly, and that they're there with Kimberly, because it mostly was a family drama, it felt a little bit like we need to fill up some space. How do we fill up some space? Let's throw in some classmates.
Yeah.
But that being said, I love Seth. I think Seth is my favorite character out of all of them. And this is mad props to Justin Cooley, I think his name is, who played Seth on Broadway. Yeah, Justin Cooley. You and I feel like we had a deep connection with Seth, like just how awkward he was. What was it for you about Seth?
I really liked the way that he would like stumble over his words, because that was so me at 16. Like,
yes,
you know, he's trying so hard to be like relatable and cool and chill, but then he gets like really passionate about something that he's into, and he starts kind of like jumping down this rabbit hole of like, oh, let me tell you all about this thing that I'm so excited about right now. And she's just standing there like,
Yeah, I feel like I still do that. And sometimes when I'm editing these podcasts, I'm like, oh, Brian, you're tripping over yourself because you're so excited. And I'm actually slowing myself down tonight a lot. I'm really working on it. Because there is that ADHD energy of being like, I want to share this all with you. I just want this to be the coolest thing ever. I love it. I want you to love it. And so I felt like Seth a little bit. And I was like, oh, I'm still like that at 30 years old. I'm still that little boy in high school who just wants to be seen and just wants to have a friend. And so mad props to him.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the funniest scenes for me was like in the beginning when he forgets his, his tuba or something like that.
Yes.
At the ice skating rink, and he comes back and Kimberly's sitting on the bench with her dad, and her dad's like making comments about him, and he's like, I can hear you. I mean, like, I'm going to go inside if you want to keep talking about me. I thought that was like perfect.
It reminds me of just like somebody who doesn't like who's super blunt to the fact of like social cues, being like for a lot of us in the Midwest, we would be like, you just go and you kind of keep your mouth shut. And he's very much like you can talk about me, but I'm still here and I'm going to be leaving.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting, I don't know. He was a very cool character for me. And I'm glad that him and Kimberly found happiness together. And I know there's a lot of people that didn't like their storyline, especially because they're perceiving Kimberly as an older woman, which I think is, they missed the point of the show.
Right.
But like Seth is the one that really does bring her happiness throughout all of this for once.
Yeah.
Is there any other characters that were stand out to you? And of course, we talked about Aunt Debra. We can always bring her back up.
The show stealer for me.
There was, okay, she reminds me of somebody from SNL.
Yeah.
Amy Bryant, is that her name?
I think so.
Okay. She had that energy that was just like, first off, Emily Koch, I think is her name, Coch. Koch, sorry, I can spell. She can belt. That song, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was crazy. But she was hilarious.
Yeah, well, and I think in a show where so many of the characters are timid in a way, to have one person that comes in and immediately is not timid in any way, is like, here I am, and I'm gonna belt this song out, and is just like, steals the scene just because, you know, the mom is off anxious and nervous in one way, the dad's muttering in another way, Kimberly's kind of just like standing there, you know, even the high school kids are all kind of running around, and she's just like, no, here I am, this is who I am. Yes. You're gonna like me or you're not, like.
I do want to just correct myself. Her name is Emily Cook, so like I feel like that's important to correct myself on. But yeah, she's the most confident, and you saw the confidence in Kimberly when she was around. Like, she became more sure of herself because Aunt Debra was so sure of herself.
Yeah.
And there's like a beauty to that.
I think it even rubs off on the classmates as well. Like, you see them kind of progress a little bit as well, like when they start being around her.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost intoxicating. It's intoxicating to see. a strong character, but specifically a strong woman. And there's not in this show. It's a small cast, and the only other adult woman is very meek, but also very like bossy to her, like what she wants, and not emotionally receptive to her daughter and what her daughter needs. And so there's all of these different pieces that just adds to that makes Debra the most likable. And I think that like there's some people that could find her easily the most hateable character, but she's just so genuine.
Yeah.
You can't help but be like, oh yeah, you're great. But with that, we're actually running out of time from our episode 1. So be on the lookout for part 2 of our Kimberly Akimbo discussion, where we will break down the music, technical aspects of the show, and giving our final verdict. Thank you again for joining us here in our box seats, and thank you again, Ryann, for being here with me. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
Until next curtain call.